When you're working on machine learning projects, you encounter data in a variety of formats. Now, historically, we have been dealing with what is known as structured data. A structured data is nothing but a data in a tabular format. If you can imagine an Excel sheet, if you can imagine a RDBMS table where you have rows and columns, we call them as structured data. So information is delimited or it is column wise aligned. So you know what starts when, and you have a predefined set of columns against which the data has been calculated. Now, when you look at structured data, there are potentially four types of data that you would have dealt with. The first one is called as a continuous number. A continuous data is something on which you can do mean, median, mode, standard deviation, variation. You can do mathematical calculations. For instance, age of an individual, salary of an individual, viscosity of a tire. You could consider the sales, margin, cost, expenses, number of trips that somebody makes, number of customers visiting a shop, number of advertisement played per second. So it could be anything, any number on which you can do any calculations. Theoretically, from minus infinity to plus infinity, but practically a more meaningful number. We call them as continuous numeric. This is one type of data that you would encounter. A second type of data, I call it as references. Is essentially examples inclusive of employee ID, project ID, customer ID, sometimes date of birth. Now, this is all information which refers to a reference point. You can't do any calculations on them per se, but they are used as references for dealing with the rest of the data. I use the word date in between. So, for instance, date of birth, date of hire, project start date, project end date, there are reference points. You can't do any calculations with them. However, what you can do is the difference between today and date of birth, which is nothing but your age. The difference between a project start date and the project end date, which is nothing but the duration of the project. They go into continuous numeric category. So difference between dates makes sense. The date itself is just a reference point. The third type of information that you will encounter in a structured data is called as categorical data. So you have certain data that gets itself repeated. For example, designation of an employee, the city, the region of sales, gender field, what kind of business line somebody works on. So these are basically information which gets repeated across many observations. So you could look at the risk of an insure, where you can have low, medium, or high. So if you have 1,000 customers, some of them will have low, some of them will have medium, some of them will have high. That is an example of categorical data. Nothing but a bunch of choices. What is changing the industry today is the second half of it, which is the unstructured data. Now you have a lot of data coming in through text format. Now, historically, you may have collected this as part of your structured data itself. For instance, the name of an individual is something that you may have been collecting, but you may have been ignoring it. The log details, you could look at customer comments, employee comments as part of the satisfaction survey. You could look at any description about a project as a description field. So you didn't so far have not allowed the machines to go through that. Rather, people have been using it as a manual verification or validation of information. Now, today, the algorithms are there to process these data points also efficiently. For example, you may be putting up an ad in rental site. Apart from filling up the predetermined list of columns like the number of bedrooms, whether it is a gated community or not, you also have an option to type in specific information in a nice little descriptive column where you can jack up the your value of the house. So you could think about, okay, it's an excellent condition, very close to schools, uh, you know whether you have recently painted, all of that. That will ensure that there are better callback for your advertisements. So sentiment analysis of Twitter is also another example. So the number of areas where text data is also being leveraged. The next area where an unstructured format is coming in is images. So the old adage says image is worth 1,000 words. The new one is image is worth 1,000 data points. So you can extract a lot of information from an image, and there are algorithms that can process it. The last but not the least is basically the sound data type. And sound again goes into two tracks: sound converted into speech, speech converted into text, or sound converted into tone that indicates the tone of somebody's conversation. And this becomes extremely critical when we're dealing with customer center operations, where you have a computer which is responding back to people's queries. And if the computer feels that the tone of the customer indicates a level of frustration, it's better yet that it is able to redirect it to a human for a faster resolution. Now, these are the kind of data that you will be finding. Now, within this, so when I talked about the data, you could think of it from a context of a target variable or an input variables. If it is a target variable, it's either continuous numeric or it is categorical. If it is input, it could be in any of these formats. But essentially, all of these formats within the computer basically gets converted into continuous numeric. A target variable is also called as label variable. It's also called as dependent variable. Dependent variable. And your input variables are also called as features or independent variables. These are your input variables, independent variables, and this is your target variable. So these are the kind of data types that you will be encountering in your machine learning program.